This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I'm your host, Jason Baum, and with me, as always, my co-hosts and panelists, Evelyn Coleman and Marcus Merrill. Welcome back, folks.
Hello.
We've got a juicy topic for you today. We're going to talk about shift left. Maybe this is controversial, but this is something that we occasionally talk about off air, behind the scenes. We like to throw something out that's relatively controversial and then debate it. I'm not going to name names. Marcus likes to do that quite a bit. And I do too, in the same vein of like when I kind of threw out, does anybody care about AI outside of the tech industry? I guess that you could say that was kind of a contrarian or different take on things. So today, we're going to talk about shift left. And probably familiar with the term shift left. If you're in tech, I'm pretty positive you've heard of shift left. And DevOps, it's become kind of these buzzwords that are thrown out a lot. But really, at the end of the day, shift left, referring to the practice in software development of integrating testing, security, and operation considerations early in the SDLC and aiming to detect, resolve issues early in the process, which is less costly, less time consuming, yada, 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 all the reasons for shift left. I'm going to throw this out to the panel. What are the advantages of shift left? Like, we should probably talk about what the advantages are, then the disadvantages, and then maybe we could debate it a little bit.
Maybe it's an assumption I'm making based on being a little bit defensive, but I feel like one of the great unspoken assumptions of shift left is, yay, we get to fire the testers now. We're basically moving the burden of testing onto developers. And guess what? I've spent the last 25 years learning one fact in my life that is immutable, intractable, which is developers do not want to test. And the very core assumption of shifting left is that developers are now going to test. On its face, it seems a little bit silly to assume that that was ever going to work. Not that it's failed. So the question is that the correct assumption? Not about the testers being fired, but about moving testing to, are we moving it earlier in terms of the process? Or are we moving it in terms of who is doing it, or both? And to me, that the disadvantage is that if you're shifting it to that persona is already drowning in work and already doesn't have time to do the extra testing that you're now assigning them. So that seems like a disadvantage to me.
That's a good take. I think what makes shift left so catchy, I guess, is a very human thing, right? We've all made mistakes and we all wish we could have caught those mistakes earlier. So if somebody comes to you and tells you about anything, regardless if it's about testing or if it's about how you ride your bicycle during the race, and somebody tells you, well, I have a way that you can prevent that if you can just catch it earlier. I think just as humans and people living in our society, we tend to go, oh yeah, that makes sense to us. It just automatically kind of we have this bias towards an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We have all these idioms about prevention and being early. But one of the things it doesn't take into account is that in the future, right, the future state, sometimes the cure can be very cheap and easy and fast. And maybe that ounce of prevention wasn't really worth it at all. So I don't know. I agree with you on like a detailed level about who's actually doing the testing. But I think shift left is just really catchy altogether because that's how humans have just been taught. If your parents are looking at you going, if only you had thought about your actions in advance, right? We're like raised to think that way.
Yeah. This is one of those things for me that, like agile, DevOps is it's a thought system. It's not necessarily all practice, because when it's starting to be put into place, that's where you have issues, because we don't live in a vacuum. And yeah, in a perfect world, if you could catch all bugs early and often, it's cheaper. You'll be able to solve problems easier because they're less complex early in the process. You have enhanced collaboration. It's going to go faster, and all the yada yada, all the stuff that we're told makes sense about shift left. But then, like to what Marcus's point was saying, it's reality. Well, the reality is who's going to do that? When are they going to do that? With what time are they going to do that? And that brings us to like the reality of the situation when we did the developers behaving badly report. And what was it? 77% of developers said they had new stuff on their plate that they didn't have before. And of that, they were all like 67% or whatever were using ChatGPT and all these other shortcuts because they just don't have time to test. And maybe it's not that developers don't like to test or they think unit testing is the only type of testing. It's not. They're going to do their best and they're going to get through it as fast as they can. That in and of itself is going to create more errors, more bugs, more things that have to be caught later.
When the tests themselves are unreliable, you got a problem. It's funny. One of the advantages to shift left is this idea that, well, developers are doing this, which means it will be automated testing. So we're going to have automated testing, and that's what we've always wanted. We've been trying to teach the testers, the QA folks to do automated testing for years. There's only a few of them who are any good at it. And so this way we get to make sure we have automation. However, it's kind of ignoring the fact that testing is a craft, not just an activity. And that when you do testing at a kind of a high level, certainly with automation, there is real engineering work involved in making sure that those tests are, stable and reliable and actually do what they say they're trying to do. And if you're not doing any of that, you might as well delete every single test you've got. And you might as well just not have automation, because the truth is you already don't. If you have tests that are unreliable, unstable, and not engineered to do what they say they're going to do, you're already not testing.
Yeah. And I guess this is where we sort of move into the current day of software development, where I think we're all starting to realize you can't just rely on shift left. It's got to be all phases, right? Make continuous testing a true statement. Continuous testing in shift left means testing early. Shift right means testing in production. What does it mean for actually testing continuously? I think that's where it sort of gets left out, because in DevOps Helix, right, it's testing early, testing often. I think there was a breakdown in that, right? Marcus, am I wrong in that?
No, I think you're right. It's interesting because I'm thinking about this guy I used to know, Brett Petticord, and he's kind of known in the testing community. He invented Water, which, our Titus Fortner took over that project. And he was actually one of the people in the room when Selenium was being invented. He is the one who actually announced it to the world. Anyway, I had lunch with him right before he retired, right before he moved away and stopped working tech at all. He proposed this fascinating concept of testing, which is kind of like shift right. And I believe it is similar to this article that we've been talking about from Mark Hornbeek.
Mark Hornbeek wrote an article for DevOps.com on no shift testing. Yeah.
It's interesting because that proposal is around this concept of what's called a no shift. And I'm not really sure I fully understand where Mark is going with that, but it reminded me of a conversation I had with Brett Petticord, where he talked about how testing should become this thing where you basically measure. You look at a graph of traffic, like on a B2B site. You look at this graph, and it's Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Here's the kind of traffic. Wednesday morning at 2 p.m. Here's what the traffic looks like. And when you put out a release, releases should be small and feature flagged. And if those numbers change, then you have a problem. Otherwise, maybe don't test. And it was a fascinating concept to me, because it was like, it's the idea of minimizing your risk and minimizing your blast radius of any change that you make, such that you can't really have any change that's going to break the whole site. So just look at your past metrics, look at your current metrics. Maybe you're okay if they didn't change. Now, it also seems kind of ideal world, but I don't know. What do y'all think? It's kind of like if I heard no shift testing for the first time, that's kind of what I would think. What do you think?
Kind of combine this, what you just said, with something that Jason mentioned, which is like continuous testing. And I guess where I'm confused or I don't understand is, are we testing from top to bottom all the way through and putting in, like, it costs a lot to do testing at every step, in time, people, things can break, infrastructure, all that, right? Are we doing that because we think it's going to help prevent something all the way through? Or are we doing that because we know how difficult testing is? Like you said, Marcus, there's people like Corey who are saying, maybe we don't even do some of this at all. Are we doing it all the way through because we know it's going to be super valuable? Or are we doing it all the way through because it's so difficult that we're betting that at least one of these stops along the way is going to have this perform down to a science? They're going to get it right. Like if we make the developers test and then we make the testers test and we do testing in production, the chances that we're going to nail all three of those at any given company is going to be tough. Not because anyone is bad. It's just that that's the reality of the situation, right? Are we just hedging our bets that at least one of those teams is going to be really good at automation? And that's the idea of doing it all the way through.
Isn't that kind of what a test is? Isn't a test kind of hedging your bets? I mean, isn't that kind of like the essence of what testing is in a way?
And then like this sort of idea, like how comprehensive does it need to be in order to give you at least enough confidence to ship it? What they call the smoke test in electrical engineering. You know, you hook up the wires and smoke doesn't come out, it's probably okay. So yeah, it's interesting because I think that I'm wondering if there's a third option to why are we doing this, is that a lot of folks who are doing testing in the job, I know I've been guilty of this in the past, we do it because it's always the way it's been done. And that's what they pay me to do. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And I don't really do any super critical thinking about why and what I'm doing or how. That's the way I've always done it. So someone must have a reason.
I have a question. It's a bit of a crazy mind experiment. So bear with me. All right. So if you could know without a shadow of the doubt, 100% with certainty, that the thing you were about to start writing a test for on the next release would not break, would you still write the test? Like this is a bit of like a Christmas carol, right? Like the ghost of testing future comes to you and says, Marcus, I see that you're about to start writing this test for this checkout shopping cart flow. I know that when the release goes out next week, no matter what you do, like the release is going to be good. Everything is going to be solid. Would you still have written the test?
If the guarantee is only for the next release, I would absolutely write the test. If the guarantee was for the next 2 years, I would not write the test. The point of an automation test for regression is to make sure that all the systems work together. And when I make a change in the future, they will still continue to work together. So I'm not writing the test for next week. I'm writing it for 6 months from now, that kind of thing.
So that's the kind of the argument back to continuous, right? And I guess, are we just putting too much emphasis on terms? I'm also thinking about that. Like, are we just naming things to name things? I mean, I get like testing early in the process, calling it left, because it literally is shifting things to the left in the SDLC. But other than that, are we just getting hung up on terms?
There's definitely a tendency, certainly. I mean, if you've ever tried to Google around for this concept of checking versus testing, there are endless debates that get almost religious in nature about those concepts. I think people do get hung up on it. I think in particular with shift left and other concepts like that, it's just the language of the market we're in. And we do ourselves a disservice and we count ourselves out of the conversation if we don't at least try to accommodate the conversation. That's the way I look at it.
Going forward from here, one of the things that I've heard a lot of buzz about, and the role has existed for a little bit now, but it's really interesting that we keep hearing more and more about platform engineering. And to me, it's kind of becoming buzzworthy again, like when DevOps kind of came out. It's just this trendy term, but really platform engineering is an extension of DevOps. And it's just supposed to be implementing, right, the various systems across. Am I getting that right, Marcus? Explain platform engineering, maybe.
Yeah. The way I look at it is, I think there's kind of a fine line between DevOps and SRE and platform engineering. The idea behind it to me is, I guess the way I would look at it is, here comes a metaphor. Software developers to me are kind of like the F1 designer. The designer is the person who designs the cars and figures out the shape of the fins and how the tires are going to work. Traditionally, before DevOps was a thing, people in IT who manage the servers, they're the mechanics with the screwdrivers who just know how to fix the thing that they were told and how it works. What DevOps and SRE and platform engineering to me all introduce is this concept that the people who are doing the designing of the car, people who are doing the fixing of the kind of car, what if they had the same skill set? Like, what if the people fixing it knew how to design, knew how to make improvements when it needed to be fixing and improved it while it was being fixed, and really could engineer this platform in order to be hardened against security attacks and chaos attacks and performance load attacks, that kind of thing. To me, it's putting real, true engineering skills in their hands as opposed to an instruction manual and a screwdriver and saying, all right, go figure it out. That's the way I look at it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I was also going to say maybe a solution to this problem of trying to figure out, is continuous testing shift left, shift right, shift upside down? I don't know. Is it really just refining your CI/CD? It's refining your processes, your automations, and just making sure that you're running a tight ship so that you are testing continuously. Is that really the answer here?
Yeah, I kind of think it is. I mean, I think the answer, as is with many things, is more communication, critical thinking, more focusing on the task and the risks at hand. And I think a lot of people are just in ruts, and that's how we got to where we are today. That's the way it seems to me. Because when I've worked on teams that have that kind of engagement, where everyone is concerned about quality and the test engineers are very, very diligent about keeping the builds green. I mean, everyone cares about testing suddenly, and partially because the developers don't have to do it so much because it was designed well enough that it works and it doesn't fail all the time.
That's interesting. Any last words?
If you can get it right, then what does it matter what they're calling it, right? Going back to what you said, Jason, like if you got it right, your company's nailed down testing, you have 0 bugs that escape, and the guy from Christmas Carol never comes to visit you in the night to talk to you about the testing of your company's future, then it doesn't really matter if you call it shift left or continuous testing or shift right or no shift at all.
Yeah. I think there's so many things that we have like ideas of like how things should be, and we lay it all out, and in paper it sounds so brilliant. And then you put it into practice, and we're human beings. And what are human beings? Flawed. And like we're always going to mess it up. That you can pretty much count on human beings to mess up stuff.
Really, Jason, I think if only we could get ahead of that.
Actually, to call out Devin on a previous episode that we did that came out the week that Devin was debunked, we should probably acknowledge that on this episode, but it's still a good episode. You should go watch it, but it's really funny now.
Man. The ways people can grift. The grift is so clever.
This is the problem. What do you trust anymore? I thought you could trust everything on the internet. What are you going to tell me next? I can't trust anything?
Yeah. It just feels to me like it's really funny that we're talking about how humans mess up, humans are fallible. And what is the thing that ChatGPT is consuming in order to make its model? All of that fallible information, then treated probabilistically, which means that the chances of errors are probably going to mushroom cloud at some point.
Just give it to a human being and we will mess it up. That is pretty much guaranteed. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Test Case Scenario. Thank you to Marcus Merrill and Evelyn Coleman. As always, it is an absolute pleasure talking to you on a weekly basis. And it is so great to be talking to you, our audience, as well. And we thank you for your time and for listening. And until next time, catch us on Test Case Scenario. Like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.